My name's Jean Edmiston. I live in Glasgow, although originally I'm from Aberdeen. Long ago, and not so far from here, there lived a king and his daughter Rashiecoats. Now Rashiecoats' mother had died when she was a baby, so Rashiecoats was brought up by her nurse and the hen wife and her father the king. Now Rashiecoats was a strong-willed princess, and even when she was a wee girl she liked to get her own way. And when her nurse came with her shoes to put on, she would go, "No, not shoes, sandals!" And the nurse would shake her head and go and get the sandals, because she knew that the princess liked to get her own way. And the king, well, he was a strong-willed man. And he was one of those, "I am the king, this is what I said, and this is how it shall be." He was that kind of king. And Rashiecoats, she grew up, and the hen wife took care of her and taught her how to cook and how to sew. And along the way she taught her a bit of magic, a few things that a strong-willed princess might need in the future. And Rashiecoats grew up to be a beautiful young woman. And one day the king looked at her and he thought, "It's time you were married." And he said to Rashiecoats, "You need to have a husband. I need to find you a husband." And Rashiecoats said, "No, I don't want to be married." And he said, No, I have a man who you'll marry. I'm the king, and that's the way it'll be." And Rashiecoats looked at the man that her father had chosen for her to marry, and she didn't like the look of him at all. He had a mean face, and people said he was bad-tempered. What was she going to do? She went to the hen wife and she says, "What am I going to do? My father wants me to marry this man. He's got a mean face and a bad temper, and I don't want to marry him. What'll I do?" And the hen wife said, Now, lass, here's what to do. Go to the king your father and ask him for a coat made of gold. A coat spun from thread as fine as a spider's web, and when it's woven is as soft as a piece of silk. A coat that shines like the sun itself. And Rashiecoats went to the king her father and she said, "Look, I'll marry this man if you make me a coat of gold." And the king said, "All right, okay, I think I can do that." And he sent out orders for a golden coat to be made for the princess. And when she saw it, indeed it was a beautiful thing. It shone like the sun and it was as soft as silk, but her heart was heavy, for she still didn't want to marry this man her father had chosen. And she went back to the hen wife and she said, "What am I going to do? I still don't want to marry this man." And the hen wife said, Now, girl, here's what to do. Go to your father the king and ask for a coat of feathers. Ask the king for this and say that if you have this coat, you will marry the man." So Rashiecoats went to her father and she told him what she wanted. And the king went, "Oh, okay, I think I can do that." And so the order went out and the coat was made. And sure enough, when Rashiecoats looked, there it was, a coat of gold as fine as silk that shone like the sun. And she hung it in the wardrobe, but her heart was heavy, for she still didn't want to marry this man. And she went back to the hen wife and she said, "I don't want to marry this man. What am I going to do?" And the hen wife said, "Well, now, lassie, here's what to do. Go back to your father the king and say to him, you want a coat made out of feathers. Feathers from all the birds of the air. Tell him this, and tell him you will marry the man if he can bring you such a coat." And Rashiecoats went to her father and he shook his head and he said, "Okay, Rashiecoats, I'll get you a coat of feathers." And he sent out a proclamation, and the messengers went with bags of corn to the marketplace, and they spread the corn on the ground and they called out, "Birds of the air, come, take a grain of corn and leave behind a feather. And suddenly the marketplace was filled with the whirring of wings, and thousands of birds came down, and each of them took a grain of corn and pulled out and left behind a feather. And the feathers were gathered up, and they were woven into the most beautiful coat. And Rashiecoats looked. It was a beautiful thing, but her heart was heavy, for she still didn't want to marry this man that her father had chosen for her. And she went back to the henwife and she says, I have the golden coat, I have the coat of feathers, but I don't want to marry this man. What am I going to do? And the henwife said, well now lassie, here's what to do. Go to your father the king and ask him for a coat of green rushes and a pair of slippers to match, and tell him that I myself will weave them for you. And Rashiecoats went to the king, and she says, I want a coat of green rushes and slippers to match, and the henwife will weave them for me. And the king says, let it be. And so the henwife went to the river, and by the light of the full moon she gathered the green rushes, and she took them back and she wove them with magic into a beautiful coat like spring itself for Rashiecoats. And she wove with an extra bit of magic the little slippers, and she gave them to Rashiecoats. And Rashiecoats says, what am I going to do now? I still don't want to marry the man. And the henwife says, you have your coat of gold, you have your coat of feather, and I have made you a coat of green rushes and slippers to match. The rest you must do for yourself. You're a strong-willed girl. Go out into the world and find your way. And so Rashiecoats took the coats and she packed them into a bundle, and she left her father's castle. And she walked a long way, and she walked a longer way, and then she walked again further and further to the edge of her father's kingdom, and the next kingdom, and into the next kingdom, a different place from her own kingdom, a land of high mountains and deep forests and rushing rivers, not like the rolling hills and farmlands of her home. And she looked around and she saw a castle on the top of one of the hills, and down at the bottom of the path there was a kirk. And she took the path up the road to the castle and she knocked on the door, and they answered the door and they looked. And Rashiecoats by now was travel weary, her clothes were stained and torn, her hair was tousled, and no one had any idea this was a princess on the door. And they said, what can we do for you? Do you want a job in the kitchen? And Rashiecoats said, aye, that'll do for me, I like to cook. And so they gave her a job helping the cook in the kitchen. And Sunday came, and on a Sunday the king and the queen and the handsome prince and all the rest of the folk in the palace, they went down to the kirk. And they left Rashiecoats. They said, not for you. You can stay in the kitchen and get the dinner ready for when we come back. And Rashiecoats waited until they had gone. Then she went and she took a little of that magic that the henwife had given her, and she spelled the fire and the pots and the pans. One peat let the other peat burn, one spit let the other spit turn, one pot let the other pot play, let Rashiecoats go to the kirk today. And the fire burned, and the spit turned, and the pots bubbled. And Rashiecoats took the coat of gold and she put it on, and she went to the castle door, and she was like sunshine itself in the golden coat. And she gave a hop and a skip and a jump into the air, and a shaft of sunlight came down and caught hold of her and lifted her up over the treetops and placed her at the door of the church. And when she walked into the church, the people turned and they went, oh, who was this lovely princess in a coat of gold? And the prince turned and he looked, and his heart began to beat in his chest. And he was determined to speak to this beautiful girl. But before the end of the sermon, Rashiecoats was out the church. She was away, hop and a skip and a jump, over the treetops and back to the castle. And into the kitchen she went. And when the people came back up from the kirk, they were full of gossip and stories about this princess in a golden coat. And Rashiecoats stirred the pot in her old clothes, and she said, "Aye, that sounds grand, I wish I had been there." Well, the next Sunday came, and again the whole castle went off to the kirk, and Rashiecoats was left again to make the dinner. She spelled the fire and the spit and the pots, and this time she took her coat of feathers, and she put it on, and she went to the door of the castle, and the coat was filled with every colour you can think of. And she spread her arms, and she gave a hop and a skip and a jump into the air, and the birds came down, the birds of the air came down, and they bore up Rashiecoats on their wings and carried her over the treetops to the door of the church. And when she walked into the church, the people went, "Oh! Who was this beautiful girl in this coat of feathers?" And the prince looked, and this time his heart was going double rate. He couldn't believe his eyes, this beautiful girl. And he was determined he was going to speak to her. But oh no, Rashiecoats was off before the sermon ended with a hop and a skip and a jump into the air and away. And when people came back full of stories of this princess in a coat of feathers, there she was in her old clothes stirring the pans with the dinner ready. "Aye, aye, that sounds grand," she said, "I wish I had been there." Well, sure enough, the next Sunday came, and the same thing happened. Rashiecoats was left in the kitchen. She didn't waste any time. She went and she got her green coat of rushes, and she put on the little slippers, and she went to the castle door. And this time, when she gave a hop and a skip and a jump, the river itself changed course and bore Rashiecoats down the hill to the church door. And Rashiecoats walked into the church, and the green, green rushes, she looked like springtime itself. And the people turned and they went, "Oh!" And the prince looked, and his heart couldn't beat any faster. His stomach was churning, and oh, he was determined he was going to speak to this girl. And he stood at the church door to catch her as she left. But Rashiecoats, she was off out at the end of the sermon with a hop and a skip. And the prince reached up as she jumped, and he caught her foot, and he caught hold of one slipper, but she was gone. And all that was left in his hand was a little green rush slipper. And he looked at it, and he thought, "I must find a girl whose foot fits this slipper." And he made a command. He sent out a proclamation. He said, whoever girl's foot fits this slipper, then I will marry her." And of course all the girls were ready to try the slipper, and the prince went round from house to house. But what an awful lot of feet he came across. Big feet, little feet, flat feet, knobbly feet, bunions. But none of the feet fitted the little slipper. But the henwife of this kingdom, she wasn't such a good-natured woman. She had wickedness in her heart, and she wanted her very own daughter to marry the prince. And so she took magic, and she bound her daughter's feet till they were small, small, small. And when the prince came, the little rush shoe fitted the henwife's daughter's foot. And he looked and he knew it wasn't the princess, but he had given his word, and he was a prince. And so he took her hand and he helped her onto her horse, and away they rode. But as they rode along, the slipper began to sing on the henwife's daughter's foot. "Charmed foot and bound foot, beside the king's son rides, but bonny foot and true foot in the kitchen hides. And at that, the prince looked round, and the spell was undone, and the henwife's daughter's foot began to grow and grow and grow, and off flew the slipper. And the prince picked it up and he rode back to the castle, and he went to the kitchen, and the moment he set eyes on Rashiecoats, he knew she was the beautiful girl who had come to the church. And he held out the slipper, and she put her foot into it. Then she pulled from her pocket the other slipper, and she put on her green rushy coat. And taking the prince's hand, she said, "Yes, I will marry you." And the prince said, "Oh yes, will you marry me?" "Yes, I will marry you." And they went up the stairs and into the castle. And as far as I know, and because this is a fairy story, I'm quite certain that they lived happily ever after.